I'm here today to talk to you about the enemy. Each of us has a picture in our mind of what the enemy is. I want you to take a second and imagine it. Some of you might think the enemy is a different political party. Others might see the enemy as a different race, ideology, nationality, or sexuality. This is not the enemy. These are your neighbors, your classmates, your coworkers, and your friends. These are humans, and they are flawed. They are often incorrect, they are rude, and they can be dangerous. But they can also be beautiful, loving, and kind. They are human. Art is Pablo Picasso painting Guernica as a reaction to the Spanish government approving the bombing of their own population. And we love art. We love art because when that artist is in that state, when they are in the creation process, what they put down on the page, it impacts those who view it in the same way. You get to experience that awe, and I mean awe in the most technical sense, daunting, unsure if you should be scared or inspired. And that experience is transferred to you, the viewer, and it's powerful. It moves us, it inspires us, it pulls us towards something meaningful in the world. Centuries ago, people realized that pull, that importance, that feeling could be weaponized, and it could be weaponized against us. And there are those who saw this power and took control of it. And this is propaganda. They understood that this bastion of human experience and creation could be leveraged and used against the people who made it and the people who consume it. You see, this is the power of art. And is that power that allows propaganda to hijack us and to use it for an end outside the means of the purity of creation. But instead, to use it to change our minds, our consumption behaviors, our decisions, our partners, and our worldview. The majority of what we consider art in the Western world, the big pieces throughout history, a lot of that was a form of propaganda. From The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci to all of the cathedrals throughout Europe. They were pieces of work that was meant to embolden those in power and to keep them there. At some level, that propaganda, though not great, it was manageable. It allowed great artists to make great work. It was people who were aiming up. Unfortunately, our modern propaganda systems have gone completely off the rails. And now it is increasingly challenging to find any positive value from the propaganda that we get every day. What was once focused on the best of us is now incentivized to drive down to the gutter. The worst part is not only could this have been avoided, but it was actually through some light, US-style corruption that we were able to come to this place. It was intentionally done. In 1941, Henry Luce, the founder of Time Inc., one of the most influential media men of his era, went to President FDR, and they changed the tax code. They allowed businesses to deduct advertising as an expense from their taxes. People today, that's just table stakes. You assume it was always that way. It wasn't the case. And though it sounds like a small change, that subsidization made advertising the de facto monetization model of media. And it's still impacting us today. It's that same model that powers everything from Facebook to Instagram to TikTok. So what? Advertising, as one Facebook executive put it, is elegant. You get this app for free, you get this entertainment for free, and somebody else pays for it. What could go wrong? Well, this model is actually the subject of one of my favorite books, one of the most important books, Upton Sinclair's magnum opus, if you will, which no one has ever heard about, called The Brass Check. In this book, Upton studies the media system. He studies the business model of media. And this is the same dude that you learned about in US history class because of how important his work was from the jungle. And you never heard about this book because it was critiquing the entire system that would be promoting him, the media industry. And he breaks down what a brass check is and how this model is actually the same model used in the brothels of old, where the John goes in, he gives cash to the madame, she gives him a brass check, he changes that with the prostitute, services are rendered, and then he leaves, the prostitute changes the brass check back for cash, significantly less cash. What has changed today is this is no longer a model of prostitution of the body, but our system is a model of prostitution of the mind. You see, this model that we exist in today is by definition propaganda, because the outcome of the art that is being created is not for the artist, it is not for the consumer, but it is for the customer. And the customer of media is not you. The customer is the advertiser. And we have built this entire monetization model, which at its source is propagandist and has had massive, and I mean massive, societal consequences. A horrid, tragic example of this occurred right around that same time as the tax law. Did you know that in 1941, we were fully aware of the consequences and dangers of smoking tobacco? There were articles going out. And then 1942, there was an advertising-induced blackout on the dangers and reality of tobacco for 30 years. Reader's Digest was the only person brave enough to talk about it. So for 30 years, we heard from our thought leaders that it was okay, that it would be safe. And this was completely done because the customer, the people who the businesses of media wanted to focus on were the tobacco companies, not the consumers. We knew it was killing us. And the journalists, the TV stations, and the radio hosts refused to bring it up for 30 years. And that sounds like a big deal, but it cost us tens of millions of lives. And yet, this was to be expected. When we subsidized advertising, we created a moral hazard and we incentivized this outcome. And as the legendary mental modelist Charlie Munger once said, "Show me your incentives and I will show you my outcome." This malincentive structure, this is the enemy. You are not the customer of media. You are the product of media. And as any business enterprise that would like to continue to exist knows, you must relentlessly focus on the customer. And in the context of art, social media, media at large today, the customers are the people who pay for it. And those largely are the advertisers. When the entire media system talked about Trump nonstop, and yet they wanted him to lose, allegedly, it confused me because they gave him unlimited free airtime. They talked about him 24/7, and when the results came in and the dust had settled, he had won. And they were crushed, pissed, angry. And they're angry at every person who voted for him. They called them names, commentary. But they never looked back and thought, we were the ones who helped make this a reality. And why would mainstream media talk about him 24/7 if they did not want him to be elected? That doesn't make sense. One of the most important models for understanding reality is that the world always makes sense. It's your model of the world that's broken. So why? Why did they talk about him nonstop if they wanted him to lose? Let's take CNN, for example. During the Trump era, from 2014 to 2016, CNN's ratings doubled. That means their revenue doubled, their eyeballs doubled, their cultural significance and relevance doubled. And yes, it was an election year, but looking back to 2012, still doubled. From Fox News to the New York Times, this is what drives media. There is no morality among them. They are not the purveyors of truth. They are a business, and you are not their customer. You are their product. This was when I realized what the enemy actually was. We have built an art, media environment that is incentivized to make a reality that nobody wants. Because a world that simply exists by garnering the most attention is a world that nobody wants to live in. How can we build a media monetization system that has us as the customer? There are two levels to think about this at. First is the structural level. It is the system. One thing that we all need to realize is that art and media, they are not free. They have never been free. And you need to realize that the app that you download for free is costing you a lot more than what you would have paid for it, the nominal amount that you would have spent. We need to realign this incentive structure, move away from the current system, and build one where the consumer of the art and media is the customer. Today, with the onset of AI, of new types of content, the technological tools that we have, we can build synergistic models of media, ones that have never existed before. And I am trying to build that with my company. And though Patreon and Substack are great, they're definitely better than advertising, we will never beat Facebook with Patreon. The subscription service, as a model, it already lost. But we can build new things alongside the advertising system that will decrease the influence and realign this business model of media. Non-fungible tokens turn the entire art world on its head. Artists were able to monetize in ways they have never been able to do before. These tools have changed the way people think about the creation of art, and as we become increasingly online, there are going to be new ways for us to not just take this legacy business model, but move something forward. I launched the first ever long-form podcast NFT. We were able to monetize our podcast at rates that advertisers have never gotten near. My company is starting to build a gamified business model of media. One where the content that you experience, you interact with more like a video game than one where you just sit latently and consume. This opens up insane pathways of monetization. These new models have been amazing for creators and consumers, and they've been able to foster communities with skin in the game. And we are just getting started. And this gets to the second level that we can think about media and our consumption of media at. And that is at the level of the individual. You need to take responsibility for your consumption practice. The stakes are increasingly too high for you to take a back seat and outsource your sense-making apparatus to other institutions. One of the core tenets of Wabash College is to think critically. Now more than ever, you need to be hyper aware of what you're consuming and why you are consuming it. Be careful. Get your information diligently. My process for doing this: start with a media fast. Pick people you disagree with. This is pivotal. It is so easy to get trapped in a bubble. And when you see these headlines coming at you all the time, you can easily other your neighbor, when in reality, you're probably missing about just as much as they are. And if you consume just a little bit more of what they're hearing, you can start to understand who they are and why they think how they think. Focus on long-form media. This one might seem a little bit counterintuitive, but when you hear a cuss word, that's a good sign. Now, people can get overboard. I have myself. But when you hear cussing in media, it's a good chance there's a higher level of intellectual honesty. And lastly, focus on your emotions, because where you're being told to hate your neighbor is where you're being controlled. Caesar said, divide and rule. Where we are being divided, that is where we are being ruled. The enemy is the incentive structure that we have built, the one that monetizes our rage, divides us as a country, and persuades us to consume at all costs. With the rapidly changing technological environment, we can no longer afford to live in an advertising-based media monetization system. And we become increasingly online and integrate with technology. We need a new business model of media, one that does not have us as the product. Thank you.